Hey guys, happy last day of finals. I'll be doing my presentation on how to read Alfonso X's Cantigas de Santa Maria as an anti-racist. I actually became particularly interested in this concept after attending the Jedi training on anti-racism on March 30th. And during that training, I thought I was an anti-racist, but I realized after a little self-evaluation that I was only a non-racist. Um, so I decided to change that by furthering my understanding of the Middle Ages and racist tendencies of the time by looking more closely at the Cantigas in particular. I had actually written my first paper on the Cantigas de Santa Maria, but I focused on using the Virgin Mary as a form of propaganda for the Catholic faith. And while doing that, I failed to realize the racist tendencies of Alfonso X's depiction of Moors. What does it mean to be an anti-racist? Well, when someone says that there's something wrong with a racial group, they're being racist. When someone says there's nothing wrong with any of the racial groups, they're being anti-racist. And that's a definition according to Ibram X. Kendi, which I quoted from this video down here. We watched this prior to our Jedi training, and it's less than 2 minutes long, and I highly recommend you watch it. It was very informative to me personally, and it helped me figure out how I was going to become an anti-racist. So a little bit of historical context. In the Middle Ages, there was intermittent warfare between the Christian and Muslim powers in the Iberian Peninsula. And Alfonso X was the king of Castile, Leon, and Galicia from 1221 to 1284, which, as some of you may know, was part of the Iberian Peninsula. So those 2 points go kind of hand in hand. And this historical context also sort of plays a role in answering the question for our class of how does historical and cultural context of the time shape literature. And as we'll get into in just a few moments, we can see how religion probably helped shape Alfonso's discriminatory views of Moors in general. There are 427 cantigas in total, and Moors are mentioned in around 44 of them. Just a little tidbit. So who are the Moors? This information is how we'll be basing the definition of Moor that I will be looking at in the Cantigas. So the term Moor and similar variations have been used by many Europeans since ancient times as a general description for indigenous Africans. Moor also comes from Greek, which translates to black, blackened, or charred. The usage of the term Moor to describe black Africans continued throughout the Middle Ages, including medieval Spain. So something that I'm looking at here is how does Alfonso X use the term Moor in his Cantigas? And here I've circled 2 different depictions of Muslim characters, and we'll get into answering this question in just a moment. So how do scholars interpret Alfonso X's literature? There is a large debate among the academic community as to whether Alfonso X was tolerant of Muslims or not, and this is according to Rona Zaid. So one controversial scholar that appeared in more than one source was Americo Castro, and basically his stance was that Alfonso X was extremely tolerant of religious minorities, including Moors of the Muslim faith. So there is a large focus on Alfonso X's depictions of religious minorities, and going along with that, there is also discussion on why scholars believe Alfonso X depicted the Moors as he did. So, according to Rona Zaid, Alfonso X's chief aim seems to have been didactic, a valiant attempt to teach a rough society the virtues and eventual rewards of Christianity and the dependence upon divine grace. That was page 146 of her article. And also that his cantigas were, quote, inspired by the religious pilgrimages as well as the crusades of the time, end quote. That was also page 146. So she mentions the fact that historical context seemed to play a role, like the crusades probably helped to define the Moor in terms of the antagonist in his cantigas. And similarly, Albert Bagby, another scholar, wrote that the Moors are treated extensively by the author, and understandably so, for in a collection of songs designed to laud the Virgin, few characters in the Spain of the day could provide a better foil for divine goodness. That's page 164 of his article. So he, like Zide, both believe there are religious motivations for Alfonso X's depiction of Moors. But Bagby also wonders whether Alfonso X wrote his cantigas in the way he did to make his subjects happy, or if he was simply biased himself, which I thought was an interesting perspective and one that didn't really appear too often. But I argue that Alfonso X is not at all tolerant of Moors, and instead he treats them as inferiors, not worthy of the same salvation and respect as Christians, who are depicted as white. So Cantiga 192 was very prominent in the different scholarly sources that I read, and it's called The Muslim Servant. So Alfonso X seems to dehumanize Muslims and put them on the same level of dogs. So if you were pretty much going to summarize this cantiga, you could look at what I underlined and realize that Alfonso X was very prejudiced towards Moors. He depicts them as other. Their Prophet Muhammad was considered a false, vain, mad, villainous dog. So they are seen as less than human. Cantiga 192 was mentioned in more than one source, as I mentioned previously, but actually in the source I read by Rona Zide, she focuses specifically on the religious context and sort of how the Moor is seen to convert to Christianity, and there's really not any emphasis at all on the racist connotations being used in this cantiga. But I more agree with Albert Bagby's summarization of Cantiga 192 when he says that this is one of the cantigas that Alfonso X depicts Moors as pagan and barbarian, quote, which was on 165 of his article. And I believe that this categorization fits really well with the fact that I believe that Alfonso X was racist towards Moors. I mean, he made them lie down in this cantiga. He had them so animalistic that one Moor bit off the devil's finger. So just generally not at all seems to be tolerant towards Muslims and Moors, more specifically. And here's just an elimination of the cantiga we just looked at. This is the Moor on his knees. This is him biting off the devil's finger. And then down here is the story of him being saved. And at the end, you see him bowing towards the Virgin Mary, which is what we saw in a previous illumination, where Muslims, and in this case, a darker skinned Moor, is bowing to the Virgin in repentance, proving that Alfonso believes that Christianity is the only right way to live. Here's a recording of the musical adaptation of the Cantigas, so please feel free to listen to this on your own time. It has helpful illuminations that depict the story as well. And here's another one that I also saw mentioned in Albert Bagby's article. And this fit the same definition of having the Moors depicted as pagan and barbarian. And in particular, I thought that the line that said they finally agreed to throw the thing in the river and for fun they tied a stone around its neck. It just makes them seem very animalistic and they don't really seem to see sense because they're trying to kill an inanimate object. So it just makes them seem very subhuman. So yeah, that was one of the ones that Bagby talked about as well. And here's just another musical adaptation. Please listen to it, and there are useful illuminations. How does this relate to class, and what are major takeaways? So based off the close readings and quotes taken from the Cantigas, we can determine that under Alfonso X, Catholicism was the right religion. And although we have furthered our literature to extend beyond that of white Western Europe, we still do not hear from the perspective of Moors. There's also a predisposition to separate us from them, and it's a battle that's still being fought today. So, something else is that we've seen othering in various other sources, such as Monica Green's article, The Four Black Deaths, where she has to exonerate the Mongols because they actually didn't purposefully spread the Black Death. It was just a misinterpretation of history based off of the white viewpoint. Secondly, Moors have just as much of a right to share their history from their point of view as Alfonso X did. So it's our job to continue to try to find these minorities and these voices to uplift them and make it so that their history isn't forgotten or interpreted and defined from the white perspective. I'm also sure that for some of you, it was definitely hard to find sources for your authors just because they're still not in the limelight of the Middle Ages, which needs to change. Here are a few other cantigas that depict the Moors, and as you can see, some of them are color-coded with videos in the top right, which are just musical adaptations that I think might be interesting for you to view. What do you think? Is Alfonso X tolerant of Moors or not? Please use the cantigas on the previous slide to support your claim. I look forward to seeing your answers. Here's some just additional resources on anti-racism and anti-racist programs and ideals that I found very useful when doing this project, and I'm going to take a lot of these things forward in my life. So I hope you find some of it useful as well. Here's my works cited. Have a great summer break, guys.